Hello, and welcome to another episode of MetaDev. I have my co-host here, Darko, today.
What's up?
And today we will be talking about continuous learning and sharing knowledge within an engineering organization.
Yeah, so while it's a huge topic, we'll try to break it down and probably make some sense out of it. And just this morning we discussed this interesting thing that mentorship is a two-way street, which sort of comes hand in hand with the topic of knowledge, since both of us mentor people in some capacity, whether it's communication, whether it's like events, whether it's content creation, whether it's one-on-one mentorship. We tend to, be on the teaching side of things for the most part. So we decided that it might be interesting to delve into like what knowledge is, sharing it, acquiring it, and so forth. So let's start maybe with what's your favorite method of learning personally?
Okay, great question. My favorite method is actually reinventing things or reinventing the wheels.
Cool.
And what I mean by this is literally reinvent things from scratch. So examples like writing an HTTP server in whichever language, JavaScript, PHP, C.
But right, that's for the purpose of understanding an HTTP server, not for, creating a production-ready HTTP server. Okay.
So this
different.
is a very good caveat. It's worth noting that all of this should be considered as throwaway code. So when you're done with it, when you learned all of the things about it, you just like throw away, unless you decide to grow it into a larger thing in which you need to put more effort.
It would probably be fair to say that this is programming for the final purpose of learning something, not programming for the final purpose of building something.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's so walking the actual journey of inventing something yourself and stumbling upon the blockers, like why do I need to send the headers before sending the content or basic things like that. Yeah. But to my experience, when I'm running into these blockers myself, I feel like it's the best way to learn things and why some things are done in a particular way. And interestingly enough, what I noticed that most people, the minute they run into a blocker, they give up. And actually, I think this is the most interesting bit. If you are doing something and there are literally zero blockers, I think you won't be able to learn much.
Yeah, okay, but that's probably good for productivity. If you're like, let's make an analogy here, I guess. If you're only, comfortable with building brick houses, if somebody asked you to build a brick house, you would do that perfectly well, but you wouldn't be able to, let's say, make a wooden house using the same methods, for example. It doesn't translate that well. Yeah. And I apologize for anyone that I might have offended with this analogy. It's totally possible. I don't know the first thing about, building stuff.
So I guess this would be my most favorite method. The other method, which is my favorite, is also doing mentorship. And most people view mentorship as somebody teaching somebody. But actually, even though I'm a mentor at Automatic and have a couple of mentees, I feel like I'm learning tons. So this goes back to the thing we mentioned earlier, like mentorship being a two-way street. And now I'm curious also to hear your favorite method or methods.
Well, actually, building stuff. I like reading, of course, but I feel like I really internalize knowledge when I'm actually trying to build something or create something practical, ideally either usable or something I can touch. And that's like probably the best way for me personally. Just build something out of what you're, trying to read about or learn about in general. Since at least part of my time is spent coding, that usually means like either building a toy project or building something not dissimilar to what you're doing, but I'm also trying to build stuff that can be usable. So for example, when I was trying to learn Astro, I started, first by building a website, then by building a theme, then I built an integration for the Astro ecosystem, and like a bunch of stuff like that, so that I can really understand what happens when you open the lid and see what goes on beneath.
Yes.
So that's probably my favorite method. Like, get your hands dirty.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that, and I think that you don't learn how to play with Lego until you start actually playing
Exactly.
with Lego. I mean, you can spend tons of time reading the design sheets, but you actually learn Lego by playing Lego. So I definitely, and since you mentioned reading, actually, this reminded me. Of course, reading is a huge part of learning, but writing for me is probably the one thing that helps me crystallize ideas. Like, my brain is mostly, it almost has no order. It's very chaotic, but when I sit down and write, in the sense of taking notes or just writing to myself, things that I have learned or reflecting on building an HTTP server or whatever.
Yeah.
Once it's put in written form, I feel like, okay, now I have a really good grasp of this. So both reading and writing actually are really good instruments or methods for learning as well.
Well, in that sense, I would say that writing would be, for more general topics, maybe analog to when you're trying to learn something related to coding and tech. You're reading about something, you're building something. If you're reading about a concept, you're writing about that concept, because you can't always turn that into code or something practical. So it's maybe the reading part put into practice.
Yeah, but beyond writing code, also rephrasing things.
Yes, exactly.
Like, it's one thing when you read about a design pattern, particular one, and another thing when you implement it. This is also can be considered writing, and just another thing, writing a blog post about it.
Yeah.
So I think all of these methods, I've used a lot of them, and actually I think all of them are useful for me. And but I think even the more interesting question would be, what drives people to learn? I'm curious on your take about this one.
What drives people to learn?
Yeah, this is probably a very deep topic.
No, this is like a long one, but this would probably get deeply into philosophical waters if you want to go there in the first place. But it's probably one of the most worthwhile things, according to myself, with being a human being, being alive. So it's just one of those things that basically defines who I am as a human, for me personally. So probably for other people, the answer would be different, for sure. But sharing and acquiring knowledge is, I feel like, something that defines me as a human being.
My take is very similar to that. I see things as mysterious, kind of magical, and once you unpack them, you see, okay, there is not much magic here.
Yeah.
But the process never stops.
Of course.
I feel like the more we dig deeper, the more there is to learn and uncover, and it seems like this can go on indefinitely.
Yeah, there's that idea that maybe your learning stops when you're done with, schooling, the process of formal education.
Yeah,
but
that's a very false.
That's a very wrong and maybe even damaging assumption.
Yep.
I would say that at some point, if you decide that, okay, I'm going to stop learning, that's it for me, that's probably not a very interesting life to have. I would say that you pretty much enrich your existence by learning and trying out new things and so forth. So yeah, I would say that, I mean, it's pretty obvious by now probably, but don't stop learning. Basically, try out new stuff and so forth. So
never stop learning.
Yeah,
totally agree with that.
Pretty much.
And things will never get boring.
No, yeah.
If you do that.
yes, absolutely. So yeah, maybe let's try putting that into practice in a more consumable shape. So what's your favorite thing about mentoring people, about mentorships in general?
Yeah, so my only experience with mentoring is at Automatic, and I should give some context about what the program is. The program is really nothing. It's more like define your own program. So the first couple of sessions with the mentees are mostly let's figure out what are the things that can be done here so that both of us find the mentorship session useful. And we start discussing things like, what are your interests, what do you want to learn, what do you want to to go deeper into, and then we just find a topic. And sometimes the sessions are usually no longer than an hour, and they vary in format. The most common formats are pair programming and just discussions, like what we do here at MetaDev. And for the pair programming, it's very practical, hands-on, get our hands dirty, and we just like dive deep into things, and we follow the driver slash code writer pattern, where one watches and the other one writes, and the one that watches just gives ideas like, hey, maybe we need to think about security here in this PR, or maybe improve the architecture or whatever. And this rotates. It's never me who is the person that always writes the code, or who is the person that always watches. So the rotation is very important, because in this case you get like two different perspectives every time you do that. And the discussions are very with just like things like, depending on what the mentee wants to learn. So if it's about like design, abstractions, we dive deeper into topics like that. Like the one we discussed with the abstractions session, we dive into functional programming, things like that. And then it is up to the mentee really to take on what is most interesting to them. And go deeper into the topic. It's important, in my opinion, that the mentor does not forcefully impose ideas or concepts to the mentee. Just show some piece of the path, and it is up to them whether they want to follow this path or take another route or learn something.
The different. Lead horse to water thing, like But in much in the same sense, like the role of a mentor is pretty much the role of a guide. You're not there as, this gatekeeper sort of person that's supposed to enforce something. You're there as, gentle nudge, gentle reminder person that, might be helpful or might not. It happens sometimes that even mentorships go nowhere. Happily enough, it's not often, in my experience at least, but it happens.
Exactly. And it's magical because, one, you can never measure these things. Like the success of a program. I mean, you could add some success metrics or whatever, but there will be always things that are missing. You cannot,
Do we get into KPIs, or should we skip that one? No, we're skipping that one. No, sorry, marketing people, go on.
So that's the one bit. And then the other bit is, I feel like mentor, I have a very weird connotation with the word mentor. I dislike it in a way because it imposes this parent-child relationship.
Yes.
I think the closest word I would like is something like partner or partnership.
All right, but still there is this sort of implied relation where you're supposed to be there is a teaching end and there is a learning end of that story, right? So how do we name the teaching end and how do we name the learning end of that story?
Yeah, and I think possibly this is an English word might be lacking for this, but something, so the three concepts in my mind are teaching, partnership, and then guiding. But all of these done in a, two-way fashion.
Right.
So sometimes when the mentee has deeper domain knowledge in a particular project, it is me who is learning things. And,
of course,
but from a general standpoint, general knowledge, I can share that with them and see if it's applicable to their domain or not. And then if it is or if it isn't, regardless, I still learn something. Okay, this particular generalization is not applicable to their domain. So this is a thing that I'm learning myself. And I feel like all of these three things that I mentioned are basically two-way.
Yeah. In my experience, at least, there's... I have been lucky enough that I'd be able to learn from each of my mentees. Of course, my mentors, that goes without saying. But especially from my mentees, the biggest value I'm getting out of the people I'm helping along in any capacity is trying to, package the concepts or the ideas I'm trying to teach them or guide them to in a more consumable fashion, something that's easy to digest as a chunk of knowledge. And I realize that often these are the moments that really show you like directly the gaps of your own knowledge as well. So there's that mirror thing. I think you mentioned it a couple of times, that mentorship is sort of a mirror. It's like this thing that can fill even your own gaps in your own knowledge, because it becomes really obvious that there are some gaps in your own knowledge, and you can try to fill them afterwards, so that you can have better knowledge, better understanding, and be a more valuable mentor in the following iteration.
Right. No, I really like the packing concept, actually. So for me, the way I do it is just iterate. And this, implies that you have to find some particular communication level with the mentee, where both of the people understand each other. This is crucial. But I do it with iterations. So start at some point and then just go upwards or downwards and find the middle point. And packing is really crucial, but I feel like only after the first couple of sessions am I really able to pack things in a more digestible way. And this requires, of course, a lot of context. How does the person on the other end learn? And once you have this context, once you learn more about the person, for sure, I definitely agree. Packing it in a more digestible and consumable way is definitely, one of the things that should be kept in mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to take into consideration that there is also the personal angle, like different people's, especially in one-on-one mentorships, not in any sort of like classroomy settings. Everybody tends to have a unique mode of learning.
Right.
Some people prefer like spoken content. Some people prefer videos. Some people prefer like reading.
Yep.
So you have to keep that into mind and adapt to the person you're trying to mentor or help along, whichever way you want to express that. So yes, what is, maybe let's try this, like to maybe break this down. If I was mentoring Boro, for example, what would be the best way, what would be the best kind of materials to give you or to guide you towards so that you can learn something best?
I would say something like, I will put out these numbers like randomly, but very vaguely, 20% of theory and 80% of actual practical work. So things like, and actually I will start first with the practical work. So just like get our hands dirty, and then we can philosophize about the theory and whatnot. So yeah, if you, for example, I was asking you questions about Astro the other day, and I was just like looking through the code that you wrote, and by asking you these questions, I get a glimpse of what Astro is and what it can do. But actually sitting together on a computer with you and me doing the writing, at least in the first couple of sessions, is probably the best way for me to learn, the easiest way. And especially if I have you besides me, because as I'm writing, I will definitely stumble upon the blockers that we talked about earlier. And if you are not there, I will have to spend more time like Googling, figuring things out. And if you are there, I can just ask you the question. And I actually did ask you some questions around the Astro templating files, like around XSS and things like that. And this took like 5 seconds. And if you're actually to Google, spend some time research, it will take more time. So I think mentorship also is highly efficient method for learning and sharing knowledge.
Cool. All right. So we dug a bit into mentorships. What other ways are there? So let's like skip the mentorships. And what's other ways? What's your favorite mode or method or medium of learning?
Can I start with my non-favorite?
Go.
Actually, no, non-favorite is a very harsh word, but I have spent a couple of months last year as a TA at a local university here. And, as I was holding these presentations, topics with the students, I felt like, when you talk about some things, like follow the presentation strictly, you basically lose them. So they would start, using their phones, play some games, whatever. And the minute I noticed that, I just like, threw away the presentation and gave some practical examples. And then they would wake up and say, oh, okay, this is actually interesting. So like very practical examples of, here is how we talk, for example, like about HTTP as a protocol. And then I will open up a browser and show them the headers. Okay, this is what HTTP is for Google or whatever. And but then after a while, you still lose them. So it's very hard to maintain this. And I don't know really, I don't have a lot of experience in academy and don't intend to have for the upcoming period. But I'm sure there are good teaching methods there. But what I found out was this is not a good teaching method because it's first, it's not engaging at all. And second, the practical part is missing where students can actually touch the material and feel it. And now, of course, we had like labs, exercises, things like that. And here in the labs, they would be like most active. And now this leads me to the other, opposite answer about my favorite method, which is, I would say, workshops. And, it also is very similar to practical work. The thing about workshops is really, first, of course, they have to have like this sort of facilitator that would help drive the whole thing. But the most interesting thing I like about them compared to mentorship is the group learning part. So everybody moves and learns as a group together. And people share knowledge in this like distributed graph of nodes. This is how I visualize it. And everybody learns at a very high speed. And everybody is engaged and motivated by working with each other. And, just seeing that in workshops was amazing. And I would say definitely that's one of my most favorite methods.
Collaborative learning, right? So I would say that collaborative learning has different properties compared to one-on-one learning.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
And of course the speed of learning is certainly, bigger, higher. Yeah, what about your favorite medium? If you're trying to learn something like personally, let's say you're trying to discover a concept in your like solo work, what's your favorite medium to, start learning something?
Right. Beyond the things I mentioned, like rewriting things from scratch, books are there also. So take some book. First, I don't buy books right away. I just, first pirate them.
You're a wiser person than I am then.
Pirate like the first 30% of the book. And if it really catches my attention, I'm definitely buying it and leaving the rest.
We're getting some flack for that one, but yes, go on.
But if I find a book like 30% in and not engaging, not interesting, or maybe the material I already learned somewhere else by through discussions with you or some other people or by experience, then I'm like, yeah, it's a good book, but I don't feel like I should spend time on it. But yeah, learning solo, definitely reading books. And I guess the biggest disadvantage in that is I really miss the dialogue part. And it's a huge, big monologue if you are just like reading books, consuming them. But there is the other workaround, which I would read a book and then, in a beer session with you, we just like would share the ideas with you and try to dissect them. So you can basically work around that. But I definitely, the thing you mentioned earlier, collaborative learning, I think that's my biggest drivers.
All right.
How about yourself?
Personally, well, for the most part, I do think solo when I'm learning. It's those rare moments that I actually have a mentor in which like it's certainly worth it. But most of the topics I like to explore either don't have like active mentorships or like the people that would be able to mentor me aren't that, available and so forth. So I have to solo it for the most part. And I'm not complaining, it's fine. But my usual mode and, mediums of learning are like, I'm trying to be as hands-on as I can. And the second step, if I can't really be hands-on, I don't have the first idea about what I'm supposed to do as a next step. It's either documentation or videos. Like it's a pretty even split between the two, depending on probably the kind of thing I'm trying to learn. The availability of material and possibly personal bias, how I'm feeling at the moment. Like sometimes you feel like watching a video, sometimes you feel like, digging through a bunch of sometimes not that well written documentation, sometimes even source code, because like we're not always lucky enough to have documentation that really, reflects the state of what you're trying to learn properly. But yeah, probably hands-on, then, passive mediums where you actually have to read, try, understand before you can try something and build something with the thing, but with the ultimate goal of producing something out of the learning process, of course.
Right. No, videos is definitely a great medium, and I have to admit, have not been using them that often. Although, I would say it heavily depends on the topic. So if it's like some podcasts, for example, or things like that, definitely, yeah, watching a video. But for learning, maybe watch some reviews or people. I remember actually when I was reading Gödel Bach, there was this video from some MIT people that, sort of explained the concepts in a more, like you said earlier, packed way. And this definitely helped me grasping the book easier, because I just opened this book and I'm like lost. What the hell is this book about? And definitely I remember those videos helped me grasp the concepts easier. So I then afterwards went back to the book. And similarly, this happened with SICP, Structured Interpretation of Computer Programs.
That's a good book.
Yeah, and I forget the names, Abelson and Gerard maybe. The authors of the book also have like recorded materials. So definitely, I was sort of switching back and forth between the video and the book, because the book is like very dense and does not explain all the concepts. So you're like, yeah, I'm missing this bit, and watching the video was definitely helpful in filling those gaps. But recently, I should definitely try that medium. I think I forgot about it almost.
Yeah, I have this thing with videos sometimes that it tends to be a bit too time consuming, and I like to fast track things in general. Like I feel like I'm a bit more productive when I'm working with text, for the simple reason that text is searchable.
Yes.
Videos aren't that searchable. I mean, regardless of how much certain startups pretend they have search for video, they really don't. But in general, the point is that when you're trying to go deeper into certain topics, text to me personally is a bit more useful, and I'm sort of biased towards using text. So sort of like deeper, an even deeper layer there. So let's say that you're trying to not invent, but solve something in a new way that hasn't been done before. So for example, let's say you're trying to write an interpreter for something that doesn't exist. How do you do that? That's really, like off the beaten path sort of thing. There are tools, of course, but how do you approach those like unknowns?
Yeah, it's a very great question, and I think it's actually a more than $1 million question. In my experience, first, I have not invented anything particular unique, and in my experience, most of the things I built are actually a synthesis of something that I saw earlier, and just like mixing and matching together concepts. So I guess that makes me a DJ. I don't know.
Aren't we all? I mean, yes.
But yeah, I mean, the thing we talked about earlier about learning a lot of different concepts, different perspectives, paradigms, that definitely helps with, building more, let's say, unique stuff. Like the very small programming language I built, or /theory improver, was actually directly inspired by Fractran and Prolog. And I don't consider it as unique, but it definitely has its own like unique characteristics.
But it's a novelty. It's something that's an exploratory work maybe, but it is something new.
It is, but it's basically stealing quote unquote concepts from other things that I saw earlier, and I still have not reached the phase, and I'm not sure if it's a reachable phase, where you can just like sit and meditate and ideas float to you. But in my experience, mostly synthesizing, previous concepts and ideas.
I'm at a point in my life where I think that just meditating and ideas, just come is sort of a myth. It doesn't happen that way. Like ideas happen by working and exploring. What's
actually, I would quote you on that. Ideas happen by working and exploring.
Yes, exactly. It's like, see, for example, what academia does in general. They don't meditate and wait for ideas to come.
Right.
They write papers, they do research, they do a bunch of things. So it's an active process. It's not something like, I think that as a society in general, we should stop, believing the myth that, ideas just fall out of the sky. It's an active process, for God's sake. It's not something that just happens by itself.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see the point where after having spent a lot of years of, working in a particular domain, you can basically sit and meditate and get some, ideas come to your head. I think it was C.A.R. Hoare who actually invented, I misremember if it was the Hoare logic or some other logic. So this is basically a mathematician that he wrote an essay where he said, was meditating on numbers, whatever this means. And somehow this idea of Hoare logic came to him. So, I guess if you spend enough time on a particular domain knowledge, the knowledge that you will have acquired will definitely allow your brain to build upon.
But that's the caveat there. Like you sort of have to invest that active time first.
Right.
It doesn't have to be in the process of investing the time, but can be afterwards.
No, right. Yeah.
And of course, you can meditate on something after having spent like years upon years on that thing, and then maybe passively the ideas will come.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. If I were to sit here and start meditating on rocket science, which I have zero experience with,
exactly,
I would probably get nowhere
yes.
Beyond like basic physics, which I already have learned as part of some other, I agree that meditation should be done only after some work has been put.
Yes, the contemplation and stuff. Yeah, that's cool. For me, like the usual process when I'm trying to build something off the beaten path is would probably amount to fuck around, find out. Like basically,
iterate.
Try, yes, put two sticks together, see whether those work. If they don't, try some other kind of stick. Like one of my last projects I did I'm not sure why this one comes up, but it was, this out there idea, was a BNF parser. Now, BNF is not a format to be parsed. It's sort of the thing that should define grammars, and it's used, as a tool to define other stuff. It's not something that you should parse.
It's a meta language, basically.
Yes, exactly. But the problem was that we were using this very, very outdated speech recognition system, which used BNF-based grammars. And we needed that grammar to train an NLP system, which would react on, the results of those speech recognition patterns. So there was no other choice than to, we have BNF, we have the grammar in BNF, we have to parse the grammar out of those BNF files. So I had to learn how to write parsers. I tried Peg.js, which didn't go anywhere. This again had to be done in JavaScript because this was a desktop and a client-side heavy application. It's a really long story, not a great experience in general, but we have to do it that way. And then I ended up in Chevron.js, which is a really amazing tool, which is not exactly a parser generator, but it's a bunch of hacks put together that allow you to build one. And after maybe 5 or 6 iterations with trying, different parsers, I managed to build one that was, worked passably well, so that we were able to parse the grammars and the keywords out of those BNF files.
Right.
So it was an exploration. It's just, it comes down to the hands-on thing, ultimately.
But this is, I think, a great example of the ideas we discussed about, doing the work, walking the path, and then figuring things out. Because you literally described it like that, tried a few things, nothing worked. And now if somebody came to you and asked, what is the best way to learn parsing? I think the most common answer to questions like this is go read this book.
Exactly, yes.
But actually, I'm definitely, in agreement with that. And that's been my approach as well. The example you shared, just try different things, explore some caves, mazes, see where you reach. Sometimes it will be a dead end. Sometimes you get results. So, but that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, do we have anything more to dig into, or can we wrap this one up?
Yeah, I think we mentioned like the biggest and most important methods. Of course, there are much smaller. Actually, one of the smaller methods I can briefly mention this is go out with friends, drink some beers, and talk about tech. This is a great learning method for me. And, I mean, it's definitely not hands-on because you're mostly philosophizing.
Yeah.
But this is helpful in, sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas. And then if you're interested, you can go back home and try it out yourselves. So yeah, drink more beers and communicate with your friends.
Yeah, that's great takeaway advice. So yes, with that, I think we can probably just close this one up. Thank you for the great talk, by the way. We won't probably be doing a round of picks because we did that pretty recently, and we can probably skip this one, maybe next time as well. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching this. See you next time.
Thanks, bye.